This boy's name is Futaro. Because Futaro's family is poor, he is always extremely frugal with his meals. Although Futaro is often teased by his friends about this, and no one even sits with him to eat, Futaro decides to ignore everything happening around him. Suddenly, while he is looking for a place to sit, a girl appears. Her name is Nakano. At that moment, the two start arguing over the seat, since both of them want to sit in the spot they chose. In the end, neither of them wins, so they have to sit together. This makes the people around them whisper constantly, because it's the first time Futaro has ever sat with someone else. Nakano, meanwhile, blushes with embarrassment. However, Futaro is even more surprised when he notices Nakano's lunch. It seems Nakano is from a wealthy family, because her meal costs many times more than Futaro's. Later, as they eat together, Nakano suddenly becomes annoyed, because she sees Futaro studying diligently. So Nakano is about to mock Futaro, thinking that his grades must be terrible, which is why he's acting that way. But unexpectedly, Futaro turns out to be an excellent student. He almost always gets perfect scores on every test. Nakano suddenly becomes sad. It turns out she's jealous of Futaro, because her own grades aren't as good as she hoped. At that moment, Nakano decides to open up, admitting that she's actually not very good at studying. She even says she can't understand the teacher's basic lessons. Then Nakano's eyes suddenly light up, because she thinks that Futaro's presence today is actually to help her with her studies. But after hearing Nakano's silly words, Futaro quickly walks away to avoid trouble, which makes Nakano a bit angry, since it's the first time someone has ignored her like that. Suddenly, Futaro receives a phone call. It's from his younger sister, Raha. It turns out Raha is calling to tell Futaro that their father has found him a part-time job. A wealthy family has just moved into town, and they're looking for a tutor for their daughter. Surprisingly, that family offered a salary 5 times higher than the market rate, which means Futaro will finally have a job to earn more money for his family. So Futaro becomes curious about the identity of the rich girl. Unexpectedly, she's about to transfer to Futaro's school. And even more shocking, she's the very same girl he met earlier that morning. This made Futaro completely shocked. After that, he tried to greet Nakano, but she immediately ignored him, because she still clearly remembered what Futaro had done earlier. However, Futaro was afraid that his tutoring opportunity might be ruined, so he decided to rebuild his image with Nakano. Unexpectedly, Nakano already had a new seat, so Futaro had no choice but to leave quietly. However, another unfamiliar girl from Nakano's group appeared. Her name was Ichika. Ichika curiously approached Futaro, thinking that he was interested in Nakano. But Futaro immediately denied it, firmly rejecting the false rumors about himself. This made Ichika a bit surprised by Futaro's strong and confident attitude. A little later, Futaro's mind was still in chaos, because he was about to become Nakano's tutor. Yet she still had many bad impressions of him. So Futaro began thinking of ways to handle the situation. Suddenly, another unfamiliar girl appeared in front of him. Her name was Yotsuba, but Futaro became even more confused when the strange girl sitting across from him somehow knew his name. It turned out Yotsuba had accidentally picked up his test paper earlier. However, Futaro soon left, while Yotsuba continued to follow him afterward. But Futaro really didn't care about Yotsuba's presence. When school ended and Futaro was heading home, he started following Nakano, because he just wanted to find a chance to apologize to her. However, one of the girls in Nakano's group noticed Futaro. Her name was Miku. Miku walked up to Futaro to confront him, because she saw him following Nakano. Unexpectedly, Futaro still thought they were just friends. But in fact, those girls were actually sisters. This was a secret that Futaro had never known before, until he followed Nakano all the way to her house, and revealed that he was going to be Nakano's tutor in the near future. However, she immediately refused after hearing that. But Futaro sincerely apologized, explaining that he really needed this job to earn money. Nakano was still surprised, because the boy who had rejected her the day before was now her assigned tutor. At that exact moment, Nakano's 4 sisters arrived home. This completely shocked Futaro, because he had seen them all before, and had thought they were just friends. But the truth amazed him even more, they were all incredibly close. Being real sisters, since all of them were sisters from a wealthy family. This shocking truth made it hard for Futaro to stay calm. When it was time for his tutoring session, none of the sisters showed up, which made Futaro a bit frustrated. Only Yotsuba was there with him. Among them, Nakano still couldn't accept the fact that Futaro was going to be their tutor. Especially since they were classmates. Miku felt the same way. And she also refused for the same reason as Nakano. So Futaro slowly began to feel helpless. Luckily, Yotsuba stayed by his side during this difficult time. So this time, they decided to visit Ichika. But Futaro was completely shocked by how messy her room was. A total contrast to Ichika's beautiful and tidy appearance. After that, Futaro immediately left. However, he was stopped by Miku. And because of that coincidence, Futaro managed to gather all 4 sisters together. He never expected that this tutoring job would be so difficult, since he was unlucky enough to deal with these 5 troublesome sisters. But Futaro had no other choice, because he truly needed this job to help pay off his family's debts. Suddenly, Nino secretly slipped sleeping medicine into his drink, making him unable to teach them at all. By the time it was late at night, Futaro finally woke up, but at that moment, he found himself in a strange car. It turned out that Nakano had taken Futaro home. While the two were talking, Raha suddenly appeared. At that moment, she realized that the girl in the car was Futaro's student. So Raha really wanted to invite Nakano over for dinner, although they initially seemed to refuse. Because of Raha's cuteness, Nakano eventually agreed to come. During dinner, Raha curiously asked about Futaro's first tutoring session, but Futaro was afraid it would make his little sister sad. So he and Nakano lied, saying that their previous lesson went very well. The next day, Futaro still didn't give up. He continued going to the girls' house to be their tutor. However, none of them were interested in studying. So Futaro came up with a new plan. He gave the girls a test. If they passed it, Futaro would no longer bother them. Because of that, Nakano agreed this time, since she didn't want to see Futaro's face ever again. However, things didn't go as she dreamed. The girls' results were truly impressive. Even Futaro was surprised by it, because the total score of the 5 girls added up to exactly 100 points. As for Futaro, he never expected that balancing teaching and studying would be so difficult. Meanwhile, the girls were always avoiding Futaro, because they had no interest in studying at all. Although they admitted their own weaknesses, the girls were determined to solve their problems on their own. But Futaro clearly understood that their knowledge was still very limited, which was exactly why their parents needed Futaro so much. He even realized that the girls had absolutely no concept of studying. And these beautiful girls didn't like Futaro at all either. However, he was determined to earn each of their trust one by one. The first person Futaro decided to approach was Miku. But at first, it seemed quite difficult, since Miku had always been known for her cold personality. She was quiet and rarely spoke, which made things even harder for Futaro. Just then, Ichika and Yotsuba showed up. It seemed that Ichika wanted to tease Futaro. Seeing the situation, Ichika suddenly tried to pair up Futaro and Miku. Unexpectedly, Futaro had a strong reaction, even surprising Ichika herself, because Futaro believed that falling in love was the most foolish thing in the world, as it would only distract people from their studies. Meanwhile, Yotsuba was curious about Miku's love life, but Miku seemed embarrassed and quickly walked away, which made everyone suspicious, as they thought Miku might be hiding something. A while later, everyone went to class. Suddenly, Futaro received a letter from Miku, in which she asked him to meet her on the rooftop after school. Futaro was extremely surprised at that moment, because he thought it was a love letter, especially after Miku's strange behavior earlier. That made Futaro nervous for no reason. It turned out that what Miku actually wanted to talk about was to answer a question Futaro had asked her before. But it was only now that Miku had finally figured out the answer. Futaro was taken aback, since he had assumed Miku was going to confess her love to him. But unexpectedly, she revealed that she liked warlords from the Sengoku period, which was completely different from Miku's calm appearance. She even became insecure, because her type was older men with lots of beards. and she felt embarrassed for revealing that to Futaro. However, Futaro thought differently. He believed that Miku's interests were nothing strange at all, since everyone has their own unique preferences. He even comforted Miku by telling her to believe in the things she truly likes. Make sure that it will definitely help Miku's studies. And Futaro also firmly asserted, if Miku agrees to participate in Futaro's class, then he would certainly teach Miku about many other lords that she sometimes hadn't even heard about. Indeed, what Futaro said was true. He answered all of Miku's questions correctly, leaving her completely stunned. Because of Futaro's extensive knowledge, it turned out that all this time it was just for Futaro's own purpose. He did this to gain Miku's trust. And so Futaro had initially succeeded in this unexpected plan. But later, Futaro was disappointed, because Miku posed another difficult question. However, Futaro couldn't answer it, so Miku thought that what he had said before was just boasting. As a result, Miku refused to let Futaro be her tutor. Although Futaro tried very hard in the following days, Miku still just walked away. Unexpectedly, Futaro tried to catch up with her. During that time, Futaro also answered the questions that Miku had asked. Only when both of them started to get tired did they stop. Afterwards, Miku gradually revealed her feelings. It turned out that Miku herself felt very insecure, because she thought she was the most pathetic among her sisters. But Futaro didn't think so. Miku's scores on the tests were relatively decent, although they weren't much higher than average. At this moment, Futaro suddenly asserted that he himself would be a really good tutor. Futaro even ensured that both Miku and the other 4 girls must study. And he wished to make all 5 graduate with smiles on their faces. However, Miku felt that this was an impossible task. Unexpectedly, Futaro had felt the same way. But for him, that was a matter of the past. Because after hearing Miku's shares, he had gained more confidence in his own words. And Futaro would prove to Miku that what he said could certainly be done. During another tutoring session of Futaro's, at that time, only Yotsuba was waiting for him. Unexpectedly, Miku also appeared with them. After thinking it over, Miku decided to trust Futaro, which caused Yotsuba to be slightly surprised. The next day, Futaro continued to go to the girl's house to tutor. However, he didn't know how to get to that house. This made Futaro a little frustrated at that moment, because everything in the present always made things difficult for him. Fortunately, Miku appeared at the right time, so Futaro was able to successfully get to the house. However, only Yotsuba was excited to see him. The other girls, however, weren't very interested. Nakano even moved to another table to study by herself, because she didn't want to have anything to do with Futaro. At this moment, Nino also appeared from upstairs. She began teasing Futaro, because earlier he had been drugged by Nino, causing him to sleep for a long time until he got home. Of course, he still held a grudge against Nino for that incident. But first, Futaro had to appear kind in front of everyone, because he wanted to accomplish his tutoring duties. However, Nino didn't care at all. She openly opposed Futaro. Nino even coaxed her other sisters to go out, so that Futaro's tutoring efforts would go up in smoke. Even he realized that Nino was making things difficult for him. However, Futaro didn't know how to resolve this issue. At present, only Nino and Miku were at home. Unexpectedly, Miku and Futaro's closeness made Nino extremely curious, because in such a short time, Futaro was able to talk so much with Miku. Since Nino knew her personality well, always quiet and reserved. Unexpectedly, this situation caused the 2 sisters to have an argument. Although Futaro tried his best to mediate, they didn't pay any attention to his words. Both of them had become serious. Seeing who was better, they even arranged a cooking contest to determine the winner. Of course, Miku could not afford to lose, so she accepted Nino's challenge. Meanwhile, Futaro was worried, because his tutoring time was limited. But these 2 sisters came up with a new game like that, which made Futaro feel a bit helpless. He didn't even know what to do next. After they finished their match, Futaro was the one to decide who was the better cook. At that moment, he was seriously assigning scores, while the girls were extremely anxious. Since Futaro didn't want to offend anyone, he decided not to declare a winner. But Nino didn't accept this result, and she left immediately afterward. However, After a while of observing, Futaro still didn't know why Nino disliked him so much. So Futaro had no choice but to ask Miku to resolve the issue. It turned out that everything was simpler than Futaro had imagined. Because for Miku, the best way was to place trust in Nino. And Futaro would surely be rewarded by her. When Futaro was about to leave, suddenly he hurriedly turned back, because he had forgotten some personal belongings upstairs. Unexpectedly, he ran into Nino just coming out of the bath. Even more surprising, she didn't recognize Futaro. Her eyesight was so poor that she couldn't even recognize who was in front of her. So Nino thought that Miku was the one staying with her at that moment. Unexpectedly, Nino was in danger, because she was standing under a stack of books that were about to fall. Therefore, Futaro didn't hesitate and quickly ran to save Nino. Afterwards, he ended up pressing down on Nino's body. However, Nino seemed to panic, because the person who had been with her wasn't Miku. And Futaro also admitted that it was him. Suddenly, Nakano appeared at just the right moment. She quickly took a picture of the two of them, because Nakano thought Futaro had bad intentions toward Nino. So she mentioned many pieces of evidence to prove Futaro's crime. However, those were just things Nakano imagined. It turned out that Miku had spoken on Futaro's behalf, because she was the one who had allowed Futaro to come back to get his things. But Nakano didn't accept this truth. Even Nino didn't. Meanwhile, Futaro was trying to defend himself. If he didn't, his tutoring job would surely be gone. Suddenly, Nakano realized the issue. It turned out that Futaro did all that just to protect Nino. Because a few books had fallen off the shelf, Futaro could finally smile with relief. Because everyone now had proof that he never had bad intentions toward Nino. But Nino couldn't accept this situation. She even decided to leave, despite Futaro desperately trying to apologize. And Nino's other sisters didn't care at all. It seemed they were used to this kind of thing. Afterwards, Futaro finally got to go home. However, as soon as he stepped out the door, he encountered Nino. She was sitting alone downstairs, looking sad, but Nino immediately left after seeing Futaro appear. Unfortunately, the door suddenly closed. It turned out that Nino had forgotten to bring the key. So at that moment, Futaro came closer to talk with her. However, he used the excuse of working on a difficult assignment to be able to stay there with Nino. At this moment, Nino felt that Futaro was really foolish, because he was always studying all the time. But this reason seemed very strange to Futaro. It turned out that Nino always considered everyone to be fools, and she hated everyone around her, even her own sisters. However, Futaro knew very well that Nino was lying about this, because there was only one reason she disliked him. That was because Nino cared deeply for her sisters, and Futaro was just a stranger who had recently appeared. Indeed, that was true, but Nino still thought it was natural. At this moment, Futaro gradually began to share his story, because Futaro completely understood Nino's feelings, since he also had a cute younger sister. Unexpectedly, Nino suddenly interrupted Futaro, because she still didn't understand what was wrong with that. So Nino would continue to dislike Futaro. Even if it made her sisters hate him, Nino wouldn't care. Afterwards, Miku appeared. She immediately pulled Nino upstairs. Meanwhile, Futaro still felt uneasy, because all the difficulties would surely come to him tomorrow. Although Futaro wasn't respected by others, he was still very determined in his tutoring work. However, sometimes Futaro didn't even know why he had to be so serious about it. At this moment, someone came to Futaro's house. Surprisingly, it was Nakano. However, Futaro immediately slammed the door shut, because he felt that something about this wasn't right. It turned out Nakano came because she had something to give Futaro. That was his salary for the tutoring job. Although Futaro felt very excited inside, he unexpectedly refused the salary, because even though Futaro had come to the girls' houses, he hadn't taught them anything yet. Anyway, Nakano didn't take it back, so Futaro had no choice but to accept the money. Afterwards, he asked Raha what she wanted to do. Unexpectedly, she wanted to try playing video games, and she even invited Nakano to join them. Surprisingly, Nakano agreed too, charmed by Raha's cuteness. When they arrived, Raha was extremely excited, because her family situation wasn't good. It was very rare for Raha to be able to come to places like this. so she was feeling very happy. Even Nakano noticed this. Afterwards, everyone took a group photo together, making Raha extremely grateful for this moment. She promised herself that she would cherish this moment forever. A little later, on the way home, Nakano remembered that she hadn't finished her homework. Futaro also began to recall this matter. Suddenly, Nakano started running away. Futaro chased after her, sensing something suspicious. At that moment, Nakano's other 4 sisters also appeared there. They witnessed everything that had happened between the two. Nakano was surprised. As for Futaro, since everyone was present in one place, he forced them all to go home to finish the assigned homework. This made them frustrated, but they had no way to resist. After finishing their studies, everyone finally started to have fun. Because there was a festival going on, everyone was excited. Futaro, however, was exhausted, but he still had to follow along because Raha was also here. Leaving everyone else to play together, only Futaro stopped to rest, because he had used up all his energy on studying. At this moment, Nakano suddenly appeared. However, she seemed shy, because Nakano was always being stared at by Futaro. She felt a little flustered now. Afterwards, Ichika and Miku also showed up. As usual, Ichika started teasing Futaro about sensitive matters, but he was so used to it that Futaro no longer reacted to it. Suddenly, Ichika received a phone call. It seemed she had something serious going on. Even Futaro noticed this. As for Raha, she was very happy at the festival, because Nakano's sisters liked Raha very much. Especially Yotsuba. She even wanted to marry Futaro just to become a sister alongside Raha. So Raha seemed to be thoroughly enjoying this rare moment. However, Nino hurriedly warned Futaro. If he did something like that with Yotsuba, Nino would definitely not forgive him. A little later, Ichika returned as well, so she went with her sisters to buy food together. But each of them had different preferences. This even made Futaro somewhat doubtful. He wondered if they were really quintuplet sisters. Futaro also noticed that Nino was much more energetic than usual. Just the fireworks alone made everyone so happy. It turned out that fireworks held very precious memories for them, because it was connected to the mother of the 5 sisters. Since their mother loved fireworks, every year they would go together. And even after their mother passed away, they tried to continue this tradition. For the 5 Nakano sisters, fireworks were truly very special. However, as the crowd grew denser, Nino tried to move toward her sisters. Unexpectedly, she was pushed and surrounded by many people. Luckily, Futaro saw this and grabbed her hand. Afterwards, he gently led Nino away from the crowd. At that moment, her heart felt strangely unusual. Even Nino herself couldn't describe it. Afterwards, the two of them went together onto the stage. Just in time, the fireworks began to go off. Surprisingly, it was just the two of them together. Suddenly, Nino received a call from Yotsuba. It turned out she called to inform that Raha was safe. So Futaro felt more at ease. At this moment, Futaro suddenly noticed Ichika down below. But Nino couldn't reach her at all. Therefore, Futaro decided to go find everyone by himself. Partly because he didn't want to stay with Nino. Afterwards, Futaro reached Ichika's location. As he was about to approach, a strange man blocked his way. The man didn't know the relationship between Ichika and Futaro. But even Futaro wasn't exactly sure. He had to think for a while. By the time he figured out the answer, they had already disappeared. While Futaro was searching for Ichika, Miku suddenly appeared. Luckily, they found each other. So Futaro intended to go find the others together. Unfortunately, Miku's leg was injured. She had accidentally been stepped on by someone earlier. Unexpectedly, after seeing this, Futaro didn't hesitate to carry Miku on his back. So the two of them went searching for Ichika together. Afterwards, Futaro realized Miku's wound might not be okay. So he gently treated it. This made Miku feel somewhat shy. Afterwards, the two of them sat down together. At this moment, Miku listened as Futaro expressed his curiosity. Because he had earlier seen Ichika with a strange man. It turned out that Miku had seen the man before as well. Because Ichika had gotten out of his car, it seemed there was something suspicious about this situation. But Futaro didn't dare make any assumptions. At this time, the two of them were approached by reporters for an interview. Because they were surveying people who had come to watch the fireworks today. Afterwards, the two reporters were curious about the relationship between Futaro and Miku, because the two looked like a real couple. However, this immediately startled both of them. Miku quickly denied it, but the two of them were holding hands at that moment, so neither of them knew how to explain the situation. A little later, Futaro continued searching for the others. This time, he spotted Nakano, but as soon as he approached, he hurriedly asked her about their relationship. However, Nakano didn't understand what was going on, so she continued walking forward. Afterwards, Nakano slowly disappeared. Meanwhile, Ichika suddenly appeared from behind Futaro. Unexpectedly, she led Futaro to a secluded place. There, Ichika pressed him against the wall. It turned out she wanted Futaro to keep the earlier incident a secret. And Ichika apologized, because she couldn't go watch the fireworks with everyone. As for Miku, she was still standing, waiting for Futaro, and Miku suddenly remembered Ichika's words, when a girl changes her hairstyle, the first thing boys should do is compliment her. So Miku decided to try changing her hairstyle a little to see what would happen. Returning to Ichika, she started to leave after informing Futaro. But he quickly stopped Ichika, because Futaro wanted to know why Ichika said he was just a tutor. At this moment, Ichika suddenly turned back, because her colleague was outside. It turned out Ichika had skipped work today, so she was afraid of getting scolded. Unexpectedly, Ichika hugged Futaro tightly, because they were pretending to be a couple. However, the old man was sitting right there, so they had to maintain that position for a while. At this point, Ichika revealed that she was actually the filming assistant of that strange man. Suddenly, he grabbed Miku's hand, thinking she was Ichika. Meanwhile, Nino sat sadly, waiting alone, but she was determined to gather all 5 sisters to watch the fireworks together. Returning to Futaro, he chased after the man to grab Miku. At this moment, Futaro clearly understood the relationship between the two, and also the 4 remaining Nakano sisters. He straightforwardly answered that he was an associate of the girls. Meanwhile, the man demanded Ichika back, because she was truly a talented young actress. Upon hearing this, everyone present was extremely shocked. Ichika covered her face out of embarrassment. Afterwards, the man apologized for mistaking her, so Ichika was taken away by him. Seeing this, Miku called for Futaro to chase after them, but he couldn't leave Miku alone there. After Miku assured him that she would be fine, Futaro finally chased after the two. At this moment, the man was going to get his car. Meanwhile, Futaro, as a tutor and as an associate, wanted Ichika to return to be with everyone. Now Ichika revealed the truth. She had been selected 6 months ago to join the film crew. At this moment, Ichika shared that there was currently an audition for the lead role, and it was for a very famous movie. So Ichika decided to invite Futaro to try being her co-actor. Unexpectedly, Futaro not only didn't refuse, but also read through additional lines from the script. A little later, the man drove up. Ichika was about to leave. Suddenly, Futaro held her hand tightly. He also reminded Ichika not to put on another fake smile, because Futaro knew that Ichika always did that just to hide her true feelings. It turned out she had a reason for doing so, because Ichika promised herself to conceal it from her sisters until she truly succeeded. Unexpectedly, that was also why she had skipped watching the fireworks this time. However, Futaro said Ichika's smile was too fake. It wouldn't help her acting at all. It would be better for Ichika to return and study diligently, so that she could pass exams and graduate. However, this was the path Ichika had chosen, so she didn't listen to Futaro's advice and left. At Ichika's audition, she was playing the role of a student who had just graduated. And Ichika had to express gratitude to her teacher, the one who had patiently taught her. While Ichika was acting, she kept thinking about her family, and also about her tutor, Futaro. Surprisingly, thanks to his earlier reminder, Ichika was finally able to give a natural smile. It didn't feel fake at all, something that amazed everyone. Futaro waited for Ichika outside until the audition ended. Afterwards, he called the 4 remaining sisters to the park. Although the fireworks had ended, nothing was impossible for them, so they decided to create their own fireworks together. Afterwards, Nino scolded Futaro for leaving Nakano alone, but Nino also didn't forget to thank him, and Ichika began to apologize for abandoning everyone. Unexpectedly, the 4 remaining sisters also apologized to each other. Indeed, their family bond was growing stronger. Early the next morning, Ichika was already waiting to go to school with Futaro. She revealed that she had told her juniors at school about her acting career. Unexpectedly, they were very excited and greatly admired Ichika. Meanwhile, Nakano was still studying diligently by herself because the school-wide exams would begin next week. Indeed, Nakano was the most hard-working among the sisters. She even studied during break time. However, Nakano always received poor grades. Despite her efforts in studying, it turned out this was due to Nakano's stubbornness. So she studied alone without needing Futaro. Nakano even asked the teacher about the lessons. As for Nino, she is a spoiled party girl. Nino is even a lazy person. At this moment, she is with her friends. Then Futaro suddenly said something that caused a misunderstanding. So Nino had no choice but to teach him a lesson. Meanwhile, Yotsuba was being ignored by Futaro because she just wanted to know how she looked. However, Futaro didn't care about these things. He only thought about the exams. And most importantly, it was to find a way to pass the exams as easily as possible. Unexpectedly, Futaro was shocked by Miku's diligence at this moment. It turned out she was practicing English, which is a very frightening subject for Miku. As for Futaro, he felt relieved because he had finally finished tutoring the girls. Although there were only 3 of them, but that was better than having none at all. However, if things continued like this, Futaro feared it wouldn't be done by next week. At this moment, Ichika startled him when she deliberately blew into Futaro's ear. It turned out Ichika wanted a reward so that everyone would be motivated to try harder. So they all went out to eat ice cream together. Surprisingly, no one forgot to invite Futaro along, but he was busy studying. So Futaro had to refuse and leave. However, Ichika chased after him. It turned out the girl's father had something he wanted to tell Futaro. He only sent his thanks to Futaro for teaching his daughters. Seeing this, Futaro pretended that Ichika was concerned about her lessons. Because of that, her father also felt reassured. Suddenly, their father set an unexpected condition. In the next exam, all 5 girls must pass every subject. If anyone fails any subject, it means Futaro will be fired. He will officially no longer be their tutor. At this moment, Futaro seemed angry, but he decided to keep it a secret, knowing that Ichika was also trying her best. Futaro was also looking for a way to teach without hurting Ichika. Unexpectedly, Futaro slipped up. He told the whole story, which made Ichika even angrier. Now she completely lost all respect for Futaro. Because, in Ichika's view, perhaps everything Futaro does now is just for money. Indeed, that was the case. At this moment, Futaro frustratedly admitted it, because he'd rather focus on work than care about a stubborn person like Ichika. As a result, their relationship was gradually getting worse. Just because of a moment of impulsiveness from Futaro, he might end up paying a high price. During the break, Futaro gathered with his friends to have fun. However, Miku felt that Futaro seemed somewhat desperate today. At this moment, Futaro intended to tell the whole truth. When Nino suddenly appeared, Futaro reconsidered carefully. If his secret were revealed, everything would only become more troublesome. Nino planned to invite Nakano to play together, but she refused because she was busy studying. Then Nino tried to send Futaro home, but he refused to go. Futaro wanted to tutor all night here today. Afterwards, he sat in the bathtub to think about many things. Then Nakano unexpectedly came by. It turned out Ichika had something to tell Futaro. So he immediately understood. Perhaps Ichika wanted to help him make up with Nakano. Therefore, Futaro decided to apologize to her. Because yesterday Futaro could not control his emotions. Then he also revealed all the secrets of the past few days. Futaro would be fired if anyone failed the upcoming exam. Surprisingly, Nakano barged straight into the bathroom after she heard Futaro's confession. But Futaro had been completely fooled, because it was actually Nino. After a while, Futaro returned. However, he was extremely worried, seeing that Nino seemed to be plotting something. He feared she might use dirty tricks to threaten him. Afterwards, Ichika had a few questions about homework. So Futaro went down and sat beside her. because he also wanted to prove to Nino that he was useful. Unexpectedly, Miku asked about Futaro's ideal type, which surprised all the girls around. At this moment, Futaro also agreed to reveal it, if they could finish the homework assigned for today. So everyone enthusiastically solved the problems. Finally, Futaro revealed that the first thing was that the girl had to always be cheerful. And importantly, she had to be good at cooking. Lastly, she had to be able to care for Futaro's younger sister. After Miku heard what he shared, she seemed sad. As for Ichika, she saw that Miku had completed all the assigned exercises. So Ichika subtly reminded Futaro to praise Miku. Unexpectedly, he placed his hand on her head and gently patted it. Afterwards, Ichika asked Yotsuba to check how Futaro's movie was going. Unexpectedly, his heart was beating wildly and he couldn't stop. Nakano felt it was too noisy. So she borrowed Miku's headphones to focus on studying. Afterwards, Ichika called Futaro outside to talk privately. It turned out to be about his unnecessary arguments with the girls. Futaro often argued with Nakano, which was already obvious. However, what Ichika wanted to see was arguing to become closer, not the extremely tense situation they were in now. At this moment, Ichika thought to herself, she was certain that her younger sister was hurting herself again. Currently, only Futaro could handle it. So Ichika entrusted everything to him. Unexpectedly, Futaro reached out and touched Ichika's head, which left her completely shocked. Although Ichika was born with her sisters, she was truly worthy of being the eldest sister. Futaro had now returned home, and he would have to stay overnight tonight. So Miku temporarily gave her bed to Futaro, while she slept in Ichika's room. At midnight, Miku woke up to go to the bathroom. Then, as usual, she returned to her room. By early morning, when both woke up, Futaro was lying next to a girl, which left him extremely surprised and shocked. A while later, the sisters didn't know what Miku was doing, because they couldn't see her anywhere. Meanwhile, Ichika invited Nino to study together, so they would have more fun. However, Nino firmly refused to comply. Ichika also reminded Nakano to be more honest with herself. But Nakano thought that even from the smallest issues, they could end up quarreling, because Nakano couldn't behave as calmly as Ichika or Miku. Suddenly, she came up with a clever idea. Nakano wanted to impersonate Miku. But this time Ichika also thought of a clever trick. She wanted her sisters to impersonate each other, with the aim of fooling Futaro. At this moment, Nino also thought it was a good idea, because it would be a long time before Futaro could tell the sisters apart. Returning to his bedroom, Futaro was curious about who this girl was. However, judging by the pajamas, Futaro realized it could only be Miku. However, when he went outside, he saw a different Miku. Fortunately, Futaro realized these were Nakano's clothes. This completely surprised her, because someone like Futaro could even recognize Nakano. But she hadn't finished speaking yet, when Futaro hurriedly ran into the room, because he was afraid someone would find Miku here. After that, Futaro suggested that they go to the library to study together. So a little while later, he, along with Ichika and Yotsuba, were present there. As for Futaro, he was curious about what Yotsuba would do if one of the 5 sisters failed a subject. At that moment, she candidly answered that she would retake the class with that person. Because Yotsuba was certain that among the 5 sisters, she was the one most likely to fail a subject. As for Ichika, she seemed to understand what Futaro was thinking. At that moment, Ichika pretended to forget to bring her pen. Then she winked and signaled Futaro to go home and get it for her. So he didn't let this opportunity go to waste. And Futaro ran straight home to meet Miku. It seemed that Miku was feeling flustered, because she knew that she had slept in the wrong place yesterday. At this moment, Futaro wanted to settle the matter. So he lied that he had moved down to the floor to lie down. Thus, both of them were able to resolve their worries. A little later, Futaro had to face Nakano alone at home. Since he had no other choice, he pretended to mistake her for Miku. Then Futaro made her open the book to study immediately. At that moment, he tried to speak continuously. It turned out he was doing this so that Nakano wouldn't have time to clarify who she really was. So she had no choice but to accept it. Afterward, Nakano let Futaro teach her as if he were teaching Miku. While Futaro was teaching, he suddenly apologized to Nakano, because he had argued loudly with her yesterday. At that moment, Nakano understood his intentions, so she also proactively apologized to Futaro. Finally, Nakano truly smiled from the inside, and this was also the first time she had done so while being with Futaro. After that, everyone's exam day ended. Unexpectedly, the girls all achieved perfect scores, which made Futaro extremely happy. But all the events so far had only been a dream for him. Throughout the week, everyone had studied very hard, while Futaro continued sleeping at the girls' house. Today was the official start of the exams, but Futaro suddenly remembered that roll call was at 8:30. However, his clock had already passed 8 o'clock, so the 6 of them hurriedly ran to school. Even though they were late, the girls still leisurely did side activities. Ichika was busy dozing off while walking. Nakano even stopped by the bakery, because she wanted to use it to express her thanks to Futaro. That was because of what he had done before. Of course, despite rushing to school, the 5 girls, but they were still marked late by 3 minutes. Except Yotsuba, who was quite quick and energetic, so she easily got in. Unexpectedly, Yotsuba's sisters immediately came up with a plan, because their appearances were almost identical. The girls took advantage of this to impersonate Yotsuba. That's why all 5 girls successfully bypassed the teacher and got through. Even so, Nakano still felt guilty for deceiving others like that. As for Futaro, he used the same method as the girls, because he also wanted to get in. Unexpectedly, Futaro's plan failed, so he was dragged to the principal's office. Before the exam started, Futaro encouraged the 5 girls to trust in their own efforts. So the 5 girls were very determined at that moment, because they didn't want to crush Futaro's expectations. When everyone got into the exam room, everyone focused on their papers. Suddenly, Miku thought to herself, how would she feel if she got a high score? As for Nino, even though she was the only one who hadn't studied at all, she still remembered Futaro's previous lessons, because Nino had accidentally eavesdropped. Unexpectedly, Nakano secretly called her father, and Nakano learned the truth about the condition he had set for Futaro. She was determined not to let things go in a bad direction. Finally, the day of the results announcement arrived. At that moment, all 6 of them gathered to check the results. Everyone was ready to see each other's scores. Only Nakano wanted to keep this a secret, especially since each of the 5 sisters only got one subject. And the remarkable thing was that none of them had the same subject. Although their scores were still somewhat low, the girls had still improved a lot. And Miku this time got the highest score, so she felt less insecure about herself. As for Futaro, although he wasn't particularly happy at the moment, he still enthusiastically pointed out the 5 girls' weaknesses. He even gave advice to each of them individually. As a result, Futaro's mission had failed, so the girl's father called him, and Futaro was ready to accept the original condition of being fired. Then everyone was shocked to hear this shocking news. Nino even snatched Futaro's phone. It turned out she wanted to ask her father why he had set that condition for Futaro. Unexpectedly, Nino herself couldn't accept it, because for her, everything couldn't just be decided by scores. Then Nino, using the original condition, came up with an absurd reason. That was, if they combined their efforts, none of them would fail any subject. Therefore, Futaro fully met the requirements to continue being their tutor. Even more surprisingly, the girl's father easily agreed to this. After that, Futaro returned to his familiar home. However, he still brought up the topic of studying. Even Futaro's father could not tolerate it. At this moment, Futaro immediately became angry, because he was the one who forced Futaro to do this. Unexpectedly, Futaro in the past was not much better than the girls. Even Raha was surprised, because she thought Futaro had been excellent at studying since he was young. But it turned out that was not the case. However, Futaro began to change after meeting a certain girl. Surprisingly, Futaro did not want to mention this matter. The next day, Futaro continued to go to the girls' houses to teach. At this time, Miku was determined to make a cake. She intended to keep making it until it was delicious. Although Futaro tasted it and found it acceptable, Yotsuba thought it wasn't good at all. So Miku's determination grew even stronger, to the point that Yotsuba and Futaro could not eat anymore, because both of their stomachs were about to explode. At this moment, Futaro became angry. He was supposed to be here to teach, not to deal with this kind of thing. Then Nakano and Nino appeared. They didn't understand why Futaro was lying there. However, they didn't care about him and immediately left. Seeing this, Futaro told Yotsuba to hold them back. At first, she didn't know what excuse to use. But then Yotsuba lied that Futaro was seriously ill. However, this ridiculous excuse left Futaro speechless. Meanwhile, Nakano was running over to see what was happening. She didn't expect the situation to be so severe. In fact, it was just Futaro's plan. However, the two other girls still did not know what was going on. Suddenly, Nakano was about to take Futaro's hand. Because in the past, when someone in her family was sick, their mother always held that person's hand. She believed that this was a kind of magic to help the person get better. However, Nakano couldn't do it. Meanwhile, Nino accidentally slipped, causing the food she had just cooked to spill onto Futaro. So he immediately stood up because it was too hot. But at the same time, Futaro exposed the lie himself, causing both Nakano and Nino to become furious. After that, they left immediately. Only Futaro remained with Yotsuba. At this moment, Futaro felt disappointed, because the girls were unwilling to change at all. However, Yotsuba immediately denied it, because Nino no longer tried to push Futaro away like before. Even Miku and Ichika were the same. They had slightly changed because of Futaro. As for Yotsuba, she thought she was still the same. She hadn't changed at all. But Futaro immediately revealed that Yotsuba was actually the first to change. And she was still very honest and straightforward among the 5 girls. Thus, Yotsuba was unexpectedly praised by Futaro. At this moment, she also took the initiative with Futaro. The reason Yotsuba always supported everything he did was because she truly liked Futaro. At this time, the atmosphere between them became strangely quiet. But everything up until now was just a joke by Yotsuba, causing Futaro's trust to be shattered as well. The next day, when Yotsuba went to the school library, she was scared by Futaro using some terrifying masks. It turned out he had kept a lot of masks. This was because Futaro had been assigned this task by the whole class. And the school was about to have a field trip to carry out a courage challenge. So Futaro decided to use the masks to scare his classmates. He was determined to make everyone never forget this event. At this time, Yotsuba unexpectedly revealed a secret. She had heard a rumor at school. It was about the legend of the field trip. On the last day of the trip, the school would organize a dance around the campfire. And the couples who danced together at that time would be destined to stay together for life. However, Yotsuba didn't believe in this silly story. Just then, Ichika began to appear. She was always late like this. Even Futaro couldn't tolerate it. It turned out that today Ichika had a filming schedule, which was why she arrived late. At this time, Ichika asked for Futaro's contact information so that she could contact him directly if anything urgent happened. Unexpectedly, Yotsuba also wanted to exchange contact information in the same way, and she seemed very serious about it. After that, Ichika immediately left. A little later, Futaro received a message from her. It turned out to be a picture of Futaro sleeping and snoring. If he didn't want everyone to see it, Ichika's condition was that Futaro had to obtain the contact information of the other 4 girls. So he immediately set out to do it. Miku and Yotsuba seemed easy to get the information from. But Nakano and Nino weren't as simple. They refused to do as Futaro wanted. So he used Raha as a bridge. Thus, Nakano agreed with Futaro. And with his cunning plan, Futaro finally got Nino's contact information. Suddenly, Yotsuba received a phone call from someone in the basketball club. So she quickly left afterward. Futaro sensed something suspicious and followed Yotsuba. And it was indeed as he suspected. Because Yotsuba was intending to join the basketball club, Futaro thought she was using this as an excuse to avoid studying. This made Futaro angry at that moment. However, Yotsuba immediately declined the invitation afterward, even though she wanted to help everyone due to a lack of teammates. But Yotsuba had other things to do after school. At that moment, she even mentioned Futaro, because he had always been a supporter of Yotsuba, even though she herself had no particular talent. Of course, Futaro had no idea about this. The person Yotsuba mentioned was himself. But Futaro was also very surprised that she rejected someone like that. Later, as Yotsuba was heading back to class, she ran into Futaro standing nearby. This made her startle unexpectedly. When it got dark, Futaro was at home planning the girl's study schedule. But he realized he was still missing Nino's contact information. It turned out Futaro had forgotten the notebook that he had given to Nino earlier. So early the next morning, Futaro unexpectedly showed up at her room. This surprised Nino, because of Futaro's sudden appearance so early in the morning. However, his purpose of coming was only to retrieve the notebook. But Nino was not willing to give it back easily, because she was still upset that Futaro entered her room without permission. Then Nino set a condition for Futaro. He could get the notebook back if he agreed to help Nino put on her earrings. So Futaro quickly complied. Unexpectedly, the notebook fell out. It accidentally revealed a childhood photo of Futaro. Luckily, Nino couldn't recognize him yet, so Futaro lied, saying that it was a relative of his. Afterwards, Futaro successfully retrieved the notebook and left. The next morning in the school hallway, Yotsuba was very excited because there were many activities during the excursion. Futaro, on the other hand, didn't care about any of this. It turned out Yotsuba was looking forward to the bonfire event. And with the legendary dance at that time, any couple who danced together would be together for life. Because Yotsuba heard that many couples would successfully start dating, she got so excited. Futaro, however, was the opposite. He wasn't interested in romance at all. For Futaro, studying was the most important thing. However, Miku still had many questions about love. She didn't understand why she had to date the person she liked. At that moment, Ichika suddenly appeared. She explained to Miku about stories of love. That is because when someone loves another person so much that they cannot restrain themselves, that person naturally wants to be in a relationship with them. Futaro, taking advantage of many people being here, told everyone to start studying. However, Ichika had a recording session today, so she couldn't join them in studying. Yotsuba also quickly left, because she wanted to prepare for the upcoming excursion. Afterwards, Ichika asked Miku to go to class to attend a meeting on her behalf. Miku even received a wig identical to Ichika's, so no one would notice the difference. Futaro, on the other hand, was surprised by this transformation. Then Miku arrived at Ichika's classroom. At that moment, there was a boy named Mata. He thought the person in front of him was Ichika. So Mata proactively wanted to dance with her at the bonfire night, simply because he really liked Ichika. Mata's proactive behavior now was his way of pursuing her. However, the person in front of him wasn't really Ichika, so Miku didn't know how to respond. Therefore, she decided to leave immediately afterward. Unexpectedly, Futaro, standing outside, knew everything that was happening. At that moment, Mata noticed that the girl in front of him seemed unusual, so he suspected that the current Ichika wasn't real, because Mata also knew about her sisters. Luckily, Futaro quickly ran over to protect Miku, so the two of them pretended to be close. Even Mata thought the two of them were dating, but they successfully got away from Mata. Luckily, Miku's identity wasn't exposed. Afterwards, they accidentally ran into the remaining sisters. It turned out everyone was planning to shop for the upcoming excursion. So a little later, everyone went together. Unexpectedly, Yotsuba felt extremely strange, because they were going out shopping with a boy. This made Yotsuba feel exactly like she was on a date. However, Nakano later reacted strangely. She simply thought it was just shopping. But Nakano's face started turning red as well. Afterwards, she began warning Futaro, because between them, it was just tutor and student, so a proper distance needed to be maintained. When Futaro was about to go home, he unexpectedly received a message that Raha was sick. So Futaro rushed home to check on her. It seemed Raha had a fever. Therefore, Futaro was extremely worried. He began taking care of Raha. But the next day was the start of the excursion. However, the father of both of them still hadn't returned home. He only arrived the following morning. At this time, it seemed the school bus had already left. Futaro didn't care at all. In fact, he was happy to have an extra day off to study at home. Suddenly, Raha unexpectedly woke up. It turned out her health had gradually improved. So Raha advised Futaro to quickly head to school. However, he still thought the bus had already departed. Unexpectedly, Nakano appeared at that moment. It turned out the girls were waiting for Futaro downstairs. Therefore, he had no reason to refuse this excursion anymore. But their journey wasn't going to be that easy. Everyone's bus was stuck due to the weather, so it would definitely take a long time to reach the destination. They found a nearby inn to stay temporarily. Unexpectedly, everyone would have to stay together. So the five sisters talked among themselves, saying everyone needed to be extremely careful, since Futaro was the only boy there. However, he suddenly stood behind them, eavesdropping, which surprised the girls immensely. Later, everyone started having a meal. Because everyone was hungry, they were very excited about it. Suddenly, Ichika became curious about the excursion activities. It turned out Futaro had researched everything thoroughly, so he explained all the main events. Even the girls were amazed by Futaro's extraordinary memory. When night fell, Futaro slept soundly. The five girls, however, started feeling anxious, because this was the first time they were sleeping with a boy. But the girls also needed to sleep, since the next day they would need energy to participate in many activities. Unexpectedly, the next morning, Ichika was lying next to Futaro. It turned out she had been tossing and turning all night. However, Ichika was now staring at Futaro intently. Her expression was somewhat flustered, because she was looking at Ichika's face from such a close distance. At that moment, she moved even closer. Suddenly, Nakano walked into the room at the exact moment. She slammed the door shut in surprise, because Nakano accidentally witnessed the situation. However, Futaro had no idea what was happening. Later, everyone went together to the excursion site with their classmates, while Nakano remained silent, thinking about the events from early that morning. As for Nino, everyone was curious about her dance partner. However, Nino still didn't have anyone to dance with. Perhaps because she had very high standards, Nino still had no partner. It turned out she was still thinking about that boy, who was Futaro when he was little. But Nino still didn't know his identity. Afterwards, everyone finally arrived at the picnic spot. Everyone had their own tasks to do. However, the girls didn't seem to get anything done smoothly. Futaro, on the other hand, was sitting next to Mata. He was being verbally attacked, because previously, Futaro had taken away the girl Mata liked. Mata was extremely jealous at that moment. Futaro even had a dance partner for the bonfire, while Mata couldn't find anyone. Although Yotsuba was in charge of managing the bonfire, she was also very energetic in helping the others. It turned out this was due to Yotsuba's own wishes, because she genuinely wanted to experience many new things. When night fell, Futaro and Yotsuba carried out their previous plan. The two of them successfully scared everyone. However, Miku and Ichika didn't react at all. In fact, the two girls even knew who was behind the mask. Nino and Nakano, on the other hand, were extremely frightened by Futaro's scare. However, this time it seemed the other two girls were in danger, because they had gone into a forbidden path. At this moment, Nino officially got separated from everyone. Luckily, Futaro quickly found her, but Nino didn't know who was standing in front of her. It turned out Futaro was wearing a wig, so it was difficult for Nino to recognize him. Unexpectedly, she was unusually obedient, something even Futaro couldn't believe. At this moment, Nino began to confess, saying she had seen the boy standing in front of her in a photo before. Now Futaro finally realized that Nino thought he was the boy she had accidentally seen in Futaro's wallet before. So Futaro was hesitating, not knowing whether he should tell Nino the truth or not. However, before that, both he and she should leave this place. Unexpectedly, Futaro's current appearance was exactly Nino's type, so she kept staring without daring to say a word. Suddenly, Nino noticed a bruise on Futaro's forehead, so she gently took care of it for him. Unexpectedly, they heard a strange noise, which gradually made them scared. In this situation, Futaro suddenly ran ahead, making Nino a little disappointed. At the same time, she was in a dangerous situation. That's why Futaro quickly rescued Nino, causing them to accidentally fall on top of each other. Although Futaro didn't pay attention to it, Nino unexpectedly remained still, and her face gradually began to turn red. Afterwards, Futaro noticed that Nino still seemed scared, so he handed her a protective charm belonging to Raha, with the intention of trying to reduce Nino's fear. At that moment, Nino suddenly shared a few things with Futaro. It turned out to be about the legend of the campfire regarding couples. So at this moment, Nino took the initiative with Futaro. Nino wanted to hold hands to dance together next to the campfire. This made Futaro immediately freeze due to this sudden initiative. However, that scary voice was still approaching, making the two of them feel even more uneasy. It turned out that the person was Nakano herself. Afterwards, Nino intended to introduce him to her, but Futaro, fearing trouble, left first. As for Miku, she suddenly asked Ichika about her feelings towards Futaro. However, Ichika said nothing afterwards, but she wanted to take Miku's place when dancing around the campfire. So Miku agreed with Ichika on this matter. Meanwhile, Nino happily returned to her room. At this time, Futaro was curious why she was so happy. But Nino refused to reveal anything. And Futaro was the one who knew the truth. Only Nino had no idea what was going on. At this time, Futaro was troubled, thinking, because he had too many people scheduled to dance with him next to the campfire. So Futaro intended to tell Nino the truth. If he didn't do so, then all the trouble would surely fall on him alone. However, he couldn't find Nino anywhere. At this moment, Ichika and Miku suddenly appeared. Just as Futaro intended to ask them about Nino, Ichika quickly left. Only Miku remained. However, she stood motionless, as Futaro was about to ask her about Nino. Unexpectedly, Miku not only didn't answer but also left. So Futaro was very surprised because they disliked him much more than he had imagined. At this moment, Nakano stood behind and agreed with that opinion. So she advised Futaro not to act so suspiciously. Therefore, Futaro thought that things were getting out of control. At this time, he needed to do something. Afterwards, everyone prepared the supplies together, so that they could organize the campfire for tomorrow. However, Futaro alone couldn't carry a large log, so he needed Yotsuba's help. Even Futaro didn't think he could be so weak. He thought it might be the result of the past few weeks. While he had been tutoring the girls, it had exhausted him more than he had imagined. Just then, Ichika was here, along with Yotsuba, so Futaro tried to prove his reliability to them. However, his physical strength was limited, so this plan was considered unsuccessful. Besides studying, Futaro wasn't good at anything else. Even communication was a major problem for him. Unfortunately, while both were working, the room door got locked, making it impossible for them to go outside immediately. So Futaro and Ichika now had a chance to talk together. Unexpectedly, Ichika was planning to drop out of school. It turned out she only intended to take a break for a while. Because Ichika's current work was gradually stabilizing, she had even received more contracts. So Ichika took this opportunity to try to develop further. Partly because her academic performance was still weak. So she thought that taking a break from school was a reasonable reason. Unexpectedly, Futaro not only didn't oppose, but he also encouraged Ichika. Because it's rare to find a job one truly wants to do. So Futaro also saw this as a good opportunity for Ichika. And Ichika at this moment didn't know what to say. After she heard Futaro's sincere words of comfort. Afterwards, Futaro successfully started a fire. So Ichika wanted to dance together with him. Unexpectedly, Futaro agreed to this, which made Ichika excited as well. She was surprised by this cute side of Futaro. Because Ichika thought he was always a rigid person. But in reality, that wasn't the case. Futaro was very warm towards the people around him. He even had a keen sense of observation of others. So although Futaro wasn't good at communication, the people he interacted with could still understand his heart. However, both of them were careless and let the fire spread outside. So the fire alarm was going off, trying to put out the fire. And both of them had to quickly run outside. Unexpectedly, Nakano and Miku were both outside. It turned out they were looking for Futaro and Ichika everywhere. Luckily, the two girls successfully found them. The next morning, Futaro was feeling embarrassed, because he didn't know how to explain what happened yesterday. Since Nakano and Miku both seemed upset, it turned out Nakano was angry. Because Futaro and Ichika had gotten into such a dangerous situation. At this time, Nakano was beside Ichika taking care of her. But Ichika clearly knew that Nakano was only trying to avoid Futaro. And indeed, that was the case, but Nakano still didn't fully understand. why everything had turned out this way. As for Futaro, while he was lying down thinking, Yotsuba suddenly ran into the room. It turned out she wanted to invite Futaro to go out and have fun. So the two of them went skiing together. Afterwards, Nino and Ichika also appeared to join them. However, Futaro couldn't see Nakano anywhere, so he curiously asked Ichika. At this moment, she honestly shared that Nakano was trying to avoid him. Therefore, she also had no intention of coming here. Although Futaro seemed fine on the outside, inside, he was strangely saddened. A little while later, Futaro accidentally dropped an item. That night, Nino had given to him. But in reality, Nino still believed it was meant for another boy. So Futaro feared that it might cause her misunderstanding. Therefore, he quickly ran away. Afterwards, Futaro hid inside a snow tent. Unexpectedly, it had been built by Miku. So the two of them were now beside each other. Futaro ignored the girls outside, since he was here to talk with Miku. However, both of them didn't really say anything. So their atmosphere suddenly became awkward. Afterwards, Miku called Ichika when Futaro went outside. It turned out she wanted everyone to be treated equally. And Miku was referring to the legend of the campfire. The girls were now competing with each other to hold Futaro's hand. Afterwards, everyone met again. At this moment, Futaro didn't seem well. He guessed that he had caught an illness from Raha. So Futaro was also worried, because he feared it might affect the girl's health. Unexpectedly, Ichika was also present. This made Miku feel annoyed, since she knew Ichika's health wasn't good either. So it was best for her to stay in her room to rest. Meanwhile, Futaro was curious about Nakano's whereabouts, because since morning, he hadn't seen her anywhere. So Futaro decided to go look for her. Thus, he went together with Ichika to search. Unexpectedly, when they reached the cable car, Futaro immediately pulled off Ichika's wig. It turned out that the girl was actually Nakano. That's why Futaro initially suggested they go together. Unexpectedly, after being exposed, Nakano immediately apologized to Futaro, because she hadn't clarified everything from the beginning. However, Futaro fully understood why Nakano acted that way. Suddenly, Nakano began to have trouble breathing. Perhaps her health was gradually worsening, making Futaro, who was beside her, very worried. Luckily, when she was taken back to the room by the girls, Futaro's health gradually stabilized. When night fell, everyone began participating in the picnic activities, and Miku had the chance to get closer to Ichika. Meanwhile, Yotsuba suddenly became unusually quiet. It turned out that she accidentally saw Futaro's notebook. Unexpectedly, he had meticulously prepared lessons for the girls inside it. Futaro even sincerely wrote heartfelt messages to them. Meanwhile, Futaro was still lying down resting. Since the homeroom teacher had something to attend to, he left for a while. Seeing this, Nakano secretly went inside. Unexpectedly, the other girls were also present. It turned out everyone was worried about Futaro's health. So this was the reason why all 5 girls were there. Afterwards, the campfire began to be lit, because the legend still remained, and the girls didn't know what to do. So each of them had to hold one of Futaro's fingers. Unexpectedly, with the combined strength of the 5 girls, Futaro quickly regained his spirits. However, whether the campfire legend actually works still remains a mystery. That's it for today's video. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to support Oni-chan in the upcoming videos. Thank you for watching. Lots of love.